Mie Scott, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Yeah, all good, all good. At the back end of lockdown, I think I've already briefly told you guys, but at the back end of, there seems to be some light at the end of the tunnel, so that's all good. What about you guys?
Seeing the light as
Yeah.
well, but currently separated from our bird that is in French Polynesia. So waiting patiently to get back.
Yeah,
And
that
we've been
must
pretty lucky
be.
to have been able to stick together through all of this with the different visa situations since I'm American and she's Danish. But soon I'm going to have to leave Denmark because the visa runs out here and she can't come to the US. So
Okay, so you left your boat in French Polynesia because of COVID. Is that right?
I had applied for a long stay visa before. And so we were going to stay there for a year or something like that. But the French embassy closed a couple days before I was supposed to pick it up. And so I only had the 90 days, which is just given to Americans. And so at the end of that, we had to leave the country. And so we left the boat and hoped to
So
come
the
back.
boat,
And then 2 days later, they closed the borders um, to French Polynesia. So now we're a bit unsure whether we can get back.
So I feel like I should give a little bit of a background here because we've dived kind of straight into the fact that you've got a boat that's now in French Polynesia. Yeah. So just to give a little bit of background, Mia, you came on the Lanka Challenge, and I met you in 2013. You came on the Lanka Challenge, and whatever that's 6-7 years ago. Since then, in between, you guys have been sailing. Well, not for the entire time, but for a large part of that time, from what I understand, like 3 years or so, you've been sailing essentially around the world. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
Well,
the original plan was we were going to make it all the way around in 3 years, but COVID and also just us being a bit slow, we've only made it about halfway around.
So you've got another 3 years to do the other half?
Unclear. We're thinking of slowing down. Actually, we have slowed down quite a bit and just enjoying it more, enjoying the journey more, rather than just having this single focus of getting around the world.
Okay, well, before I kind of dive into, because I'm really excited to, like, I kind of grew up on boats. My dad had a boat ever since we were very small, so I've had a passion for sailing myself, but have never turned into kind of the yachty that my dad was. You know, he was just like obsessed with sailing and obsessed with his boat, and had a love affair with boats for as long as I can remember. But before I dive into kind of that adventure and that, 3 year, I guess what must have been an amazing journey. To start at the beginning, Mia, I want to dive in a little bit to what your experience was, and this is jumping from sailing to tuk tuk. So only because I like to like, having not connected with people who joined one of our adventures for a while, just to kind of pick their brains about the memories that they have of, especially when it was so long ago, of the tuk tuk experience. And I know you did the one in Sri Lanka. What was your what are your memories of driving the tuk tuk and the experience in Sri Lanka? And yeah, what are your memories of that?
I think I was also thinking back before coming on this podcast, and I think what I remember most is actually the morning briefings. We were all standing there and we had no idea what was going on through the day, and we would always be so surprised in what kind of challenge we would get every day. So I really enjoyed those morning meetings, getting like excited about the day, and then also in the evening you would meet with the other teams at the hotels or the campsite or where we would be staying, and it was just super fun to talk to everyone and live through their experience in the day, because you get the same challenge, but you can complete it in so many different ways, which we did. So in the evening, you always had so much to talk about. What did they experience? How did they complete the challenges? And so I think I remember that mostly. And also, it was just a very cool way of getting into the culture in Sri Lanka. Normally, when you travel, you have to push yourself to get into the cultures, to talk to people in that way, because the Lanka challenge is set up so you have to invite yourself to do things with the locals. So yeah, it's just a really nice way to experience a culture, and to also meet people from around the world via all the people who are in the teams. So
that's kind of music to my ears. I mean, everything you've kind of said is the exact reasons why we love putting it on, and why a lot of people have that kind of that same similar feedback. I'm pleased to say you're the first lady we've had on the podcast too, and it's kind of, we actually, I think people don't really realize we probably got like a 60-40 balance between men and women on the trips. Is there anything in particular that you would say, like, that you're that you could encourage, not encourage, but say, like, anything unique about driving the Tuk Tuk? Were there? I mean, I think there must have been loads of other ladies' teams on your trip, but is there anything in particular that you might have thought before it was a little bit daunting to come to Sri Lanka and drive a Tuk Tuk, and then when you got there, you had a different experience, a different impression?
Well, I'm not the person that thinks too much before I do, so I hadn't thought about whether it would be challenging to ride the Tuk Tuk or not. I just saw some videos and then decided I wanted to go. But the first day you drive in a really populated city, so it was a bit challenging, I have to say, that I didn't expect. But it's not more than you can overcome, for sure. And I was even there because I had been in a traffic accident the same year. So while I was recovering from that traffic accident, I actually decided that when I was healthy enough to go, I would do the Lanka challenge. So I was a bit, I still had some
nerves
from that accident, but it was not a problem at all, actually.
Wow! So having a travel accident and then choosing to go to Sri Lanka to drive a Tuk Tuk, that in itself sounds like a pretty good way to overcome those. Well, if you had any
you have to do that. Yeah, that's true.
And what about driving the Tuk Tuk itself? Like, did you find that's quite straightforward? Like, this is across the board, but there's always some, like, that first day when people arrive and then getting their hands on a Tuk Tuk, learning. Obviously, you're not learning how to drive because you know how to drive, but you're learning how to operate the new system of driving. Because normally, you've got a car that's either manual, automatic, pedals, whereas Tuk Tuk you've got accelerators, gear on the handlebars. Did you find that quite straightforward, or did you take some time getting used to it?
No, I don't remember it being a problem at all. So it must have been straightforward. And I never ridden a motorbike before. I've ridden a small scooter when I was a teenager. And in Denmark, you bike a lot. So I guess I'm used to being a small part of the traffic. But I don't remember it as a problem at all. So I don't think people should hold back due to that. And also, they don't drive extremely fast, and we are not encouraged to drive fast. But with vast minorities, so you can just take it in the pace you want. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of reminds me of the first ever one that we did in 2009 when it actually was a race format. So we quickly learned that was probably the stupidest idea we had ever done.
I do remember you talked about that.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Taking it at almost as slow as possible, is probably the best advice I can give people. And it sounds like you did that anyway. And then you guys sorry?
No, people in Sri Lanka are so friendly, and they want to say hi and they want to wave, and it's just a good idea to take it slow to get all those impressions while you're driving.
Yeah, I probably sound like a broken record again when I say that the Tuk Tuk, obviously I'm biased because I've, have a strange love affair with Tuk Tuks, but it is one of my favorite vehicles because of just the speed at which you go is like that perfect balance. and then it's got that little bit of security because you're somewhat covered by the windshield and the roof. Not that it's very sturdy, but you are covered, but the sides are completely open as well, so you kind of get the smells, the tastes, and the access to the population, which
Exactly.
is different from being in a car, obviously, or something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I also feel like I should say that you guys actually won the Lanka Challenge, and you've alluded a few times to the fact that we've got challenges, and we do, like, sometimes this can come off like I think my impression is some people get the wrong impression sometimes about the challenges because it sounds like it's just a competitive event, which it's not.
No.
It's an option for people to do, and it just encourages them to just get off the beaten path and like get over certain barriers. Are those the kind of memories you have from the challenges in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I am competitive, but I didn't go for winning. I just went for wanting to complete the challenges because I knew that would bring some fun to the experience, and pushing myself to actually do the challenges, because they are not, some of them you have to step a little bit outside your comfort zone. But that's why you get the incredible experiences. So that's what I went for, and that's how we ended up winning. I think it was not. I don't think any of the other teams felt pressure to win, or that was not the main purpose for being there. So just by trying to complete the challenges, you have already won, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the spirit. And we find that, like, most people, competitive or not, when they come, some of them don't even know that there's going to be challenges. Some know, and then they get there, and then a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not going to compete in the challenges. I'm just going to drive around." And then on day one, everybody's competing in the challenges because it's human nature to compete against each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an interesting.
But it is not a competitive environment. That's what I'm trying to get at. You are competing, but mainly for your own benefit, not because it's a competitive environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were saying that after I'm not sure how long, but after you did the Lanka Challenge, did you do something across Vietnam as well in like motorbikes? Or
yes.
Is that right?
So Scott was born in Vietnam. So right when we met, we decided to do a 3-month trip in Vietnam, because we kind of knew that we wanted to go sailing with each other, but we also didn't know each other very well. So we were like, okay, we go to Vietnam for 3 months, and if we can stand that, we can probably be on a boat as well. So we rented.
So it's like a 3-month test date.
Okay, so I see how this is playing out. You'd already planned to go out. You already planned to go sailing. Did a 3-month motorbike trip as a test. I like it.
Yeah.
And then well, okay. Well, talk me through that journey then. What was the, like, you guys? Did you have a boat already? Did you buy a boat? Like, you decided to go sailing?
We were in the process of buying a boat. And then so the way that, so we were like, okay, let's buy the boat. But before we do that, let's see if we can deal with stressful situations together. Because, we had flown to like northern Sweden and Morocco, which is somewhat stressful, but being, on a motorbike in rural Vietnam, is probably a lot more stressful. So.
Yeah, no, it's and it's a great way to travel as well. Like I haven't actually, I've been to Saigon and driven like scooters around there, but not really, like, I haven't done the big motorbike
in Saigon.
It's obviously one of the most but having said, it is just because of the sheer number of motorcycles. But actually, when, like, you'll probably know that, there's a system to the chaos. There's a system that, as long as you kind of follow that, you don't do anything abruptly or change direction. There's a system that just works, and that goes, that goes with a lot of, like, kind of Southeast Asian destinations where there's a lot of volume of traffic. Okay, and then so you were in the process of purchasing the boat. Then after, well, I guess at some point after your Vietnam trip, you took the plunge. You bought a boat, and where did you buy the boat from?
Gibraltar.
Gibraltar.
So
okay.
Yeah. So we were doing. We did 3,600 kilometers on the bike in Vietnam. And I think halfway through the process, I flew back to Gibraltar to take a look at the boat for 72 hours. And then, by that point, we had already decided, okay, I think we can do this. We've survived a big chunk of this pretty challenging bike trip, or motorbike trip. So signed the papers and then continued the bike trip and then moved back, packed our stuff away in Stockholm.
Yeah.
Rented a storage unit, packed it away. They actually, rather than closing the door, they actually screw in the door to give you an idea of how final it is.
What for the
So they
storage?
put panels in, close the storage unit, and then moved on the boat in March.
And I resigned from my job as well as a
So-
management consultant.
So you had a full-time job, Mie, at the time. Scott, were you working? So you'd obviously you'd managed to take off a bunch of time to go to travel, and you were traveling already. But your decision then to travel around the world, obviously huge life-changing decisions involving resigning from jobs, like you just said, Mie. Scott, were you also in full-time employment?
I had my own company, so I was just transitioning away from focusing on it. How about that?
Okay.
So I still work on it. Even now, but it shifted from being the primary focus to a very secondary focus.
So that kind of moment of them bolting in your life belongings, kind of bar like a couple of bags, was probably a poignant moment where you were saying goodbye from like an oldish life where, I guess conformity to the norm of having a job 9 to 5. And then I guess opening the doors to a completely nomadic lifestyle that in your new home.
It was very well defined. I distinctly recall the electric drill closing the doors when they put the panel up. Just that chapter of life is done. Now the next chapter starts.
But it was also moving in together, and we hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
We were just like, oh, we're going on this boat, we're going to sail around the world, and suddenly we found ourselves having moved in together, and all the things that follow along with that, like how do you want your stuff to be organized, how tidy do you want to be, and all of those things that we had not thought about at all.
And I guess that's a great way to... Sorry, I interrupted you.
Male commitment phobia. I've had plenty of relationships, but had never actually lived with someone until we moved on to the tiny home known as our boat.
I was going to say, and not just that, not moving into a nice large apartment or house, to decide to move into something that has probably 6 square meters of space.
That moves all the time and breaks all the time.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So so that's huge plunge, huge life decision change, lifestyle change. I guess your stuff, you said, was in Stockholm. The boat was in Gibraltar. Did you buy it? Was it a new boat or was it secondhand? Were you able to name it? Secondhand. But you were able to re-register it and name it, or?
That's right.
I've been following your journey probably for, I guess, on and off the 3 years, but because I know, I think you've set up a Facebook page or something, which I was using to follow, but it's called SV Tengah. Is that right?
That's right.
And is there a story behind the name? Why is it? You've obviously named it. You guys have named it. What's the story behind the name? I know there's always a great story. Generally, one of my father's boats, he named Tarina, which is the name of my mother. That didn't go down too well.
Hey? Yeah, the US always have some funny pun. But this one, I think it has a pretty decent name. There's a decent meaning behind it. So as Mie mentioned, my family is from Vietnam. I was actually born there in Saigon. And when I was 4 months old, our family escaped from Vietnam. My dad had fought on the side with the Americans. And so we were a bit persona non grata there. So we escaped by boat and we didn't know where we were going, but we ended up on United Nations refugee island off the coast of Malaysia called Pulau Tengah. And so I spent months 4 to 20 of my life on this island that we had gotten to by boat. And so that island was sort of the on-ramp to a different life for us. And so, you know, we all got to the US. My family of 8 got to the US. And sort of in commemoration of that, I named the boat after that island.
Wow.
And
wow. Wow. So that was the boat. And what age did you say you left Vietnam with your family? Was it?
So I was 4 months old. Yeah.
Okay. So you obviously don't have memories yourself of that, but no doubt you've had countless, you know, stories from your parents about that, what that journey must have been like. So you left Vietnam.
Yeah. We tried 13
Malaysia. Sorry?
So we tried to escape 13 times before making it out. So my family has all the stories of that, getting caught running from the communists and everything. So it's
wow. So your family then left Vietnam, fled was it the North Vietnamese army then, wasn't it?
Yeah, so this was after the war ended. So after the war ended, my dad, who was a lieutenant colonel in the South, was put into a communist re-education camp for 3 years. And so after he was released, our family was blacklisted. So we were just not allowed to do anything in the new economy that was set up down there. And so they made the decision that we had to leave. My family made the decision. My parents made the decision. So.
Wow. So after like several attempts to flee Vietnam, you made it to the island in Malaysia, and
that's right.
You stayed in Malaysia for how long did you say?
It was 16 months.
16 months, and then you took a further boat trip. You made it to the US by boat?
So what it is the island was set up as a sort of a refugee processing island. So you could pick which country you wanted to go to. And somewhat unsurprisingly, the US is the most difficult. So it was 16 months of background check and processing and everything. And then once we were accepted by the US as refugees, then we flew over. Okay. So but it was a small island. I mean, I actually visited back on my previous backpacking trip, and you could walk around the entire island in less than an hour, and that's climbing over rocks and everything. So it's pretty small island, and there was 10,000 people on it, refugees.
Wow. So. Yeah, incredible. What yeah, incredible story. And that's linked to your to you naming the boat, and then your new journey, I guess, and what were your first steps in sailing? Had you done sailing courses? Had you done like a skipper's license, or either of you done skipper's license before you got on I assume you must have.
We did. Mia actually did a pretty formal education. So she's more educated in it than I am. So she could tell you about her background.
Well, I grew up in a city in Denmark where the founder of Mie Scott, the container ship company, he grew up there, and so it's a kind of a seaman town, and everyone here used to sailing. And my dad was also a captain in the commercial fleet, and that was just what everyone did here, mainly men though. And I just found it that was also what I wanted to do. It was very natural for me. So when I was 19, I was out sailing half a year with the world's biggest container ship as well. And
I'll interrupt and say that she was able to successfully helm the ship through the Suez Canal. It was almost as big as the Ever Given.
Wow. I was going to say there's a joke in there. There's a joke in there somewhere. But you were doing this as a hobby, for fun, for experience, or you were actually considering getting into shipping?
I was definitely considering getting into shipping, and it was part of a formal education with Mie Scott as well. I ended up not completing the whole education because I didn't find the work that interesting. it was, you have to. It's kind of a lot of the same work all the time. It doesn't change that much. So I ended up going to university instead. But yeah, that was my first experience with sailing. And then I bought a sailboat when I was 25 or something like that. And I sailed it from Denmark and Sweden, and I sailed it around Sweden where I lived, in Stockholm as well. And I've always wanted to sail around the world. I had a bank account that was named Sailing Around the World that I used to save money for a trip. And so I knew that at some point I would do it. I didn't expect that I would be able to do it at the age I'm in now. I'm 37, because I thought it would have to wait later in my life. But when I met Scott, it was something that we both really wanted. So we were quite quick at just going at it. But Scott
and both making sacrifices, right? I mean, there are sacrifices in your life and your career to sort of put everything away. And that is a scary step, because in some sense, once you make that step, it's hard to go back in a lot of senses, not just in terms of getting a job again, but psychologically to go back into an office is, frankly, I think it's impossible.
I mean, obviously not having experienced that kind of nomad lifestyle, but having worked kind of for myself or running my own company for so long, I kind of somewhat feel the same way as far as being able to go back into like a formal employment role would be quite a challenge. Yeah. But I mean, very different from you guys making the huge decision to actually take the plunge, and like I've said already, like huge lifestyle changes, and then moving from not more of a routine to a complete nomadic lifestyle on the boat. Mm-hmm. What were the first? So okay, you've answered some of the questions that I wanted to ask. It sounds like you're very well prepared, Mie and Scott, on actually being able to handle the boats and used to sailing, and I guess some of the conditions that you must have come up against in your
sailing is learning all your life, because there are no waves, no situation, no weather, no conditions that are the same. So different parts of the boat is broken at different times. So there is always variety.
And parts that you have no idea what they do until they break. And then you have to figure out how they work and then figure out how to fix them. So, earlier I had sailed since my teenage years and done wind sports and all of that, but I'd never owned a boat. So that was, even though I was completely comfortable on boats, completely comfortable in strong winds, owning a boat and managing the boat is completely new to both of us, and we sort of dove into the deep end. Our first sail was, people usually go around, just do an overnighter or something. Our first sail on the boat, other than getting fuel, was 1,400 nautical miles. So we went from Gibraltar to Greece the first time we sailed the boat.
Really? Okay. So and straight, like one way. You didn't
one shot. Stop. Yeah, we did it in 6 days or something. And was it 6 days? Something like that. Yeah. So we just said, all right, if we're gonna go around the world, we might as well give it a go on something, rather than just a short hop. Let's just give it a go.
So you did. Was that the first kind of chunk of your journey? Then the Mediterranean. Did you do a lot of the Mediterranean? Did you said you
not enough? But that was the first chunk. But we didn't do enough. I mean, we spent 6 months in the Med, and you could easily spend years there. I mean, there's so many different beautiful harbors. The sailing isn't the best in the world, but just it's the Med, right? So being on the water in Greece, tying up in those towns in Croatia, it's just there's no other place in the world like it.
You just did islands in Italy, and Italy is amazing as well. We could have spent so much more time there.
Yeah, obviously Italy is a place that we've recently kind of started doing adventures in, and I mean, anybody that's been to Italy, you can't really talk highly enough of what it's got. The food, the culture, the people, everything. It's such a great place. I haven't obviously been seen the coast too much of the coast side of Italy, but I did have before my father passed away, we did go sailing around. That was kind of our last trip, actually. We went sailing around Greece, which was, like you said, yeah, phenomenal. I mean, just stopping in all the little harbors and yeah, it was amazing. And then you went from the Med, and I guess that was building up to your first major crossing, because I think the last tracking, I don't know what I saw somewhere, the last tracking device that I followed of yours or something was that you had done certainly the Atlantic crossing, and then, well, French Polynesia is like in the middle of the Pacific, isn't it? So, so you're halfway across the Pacific.
It's a very circuitous route there too, so thanks to Corona.
But Scott actually just updated our map, and we done, was it 25,000 miles?
Around 25,000 nautical miles. It's like 46,000 kilometers in the last 3 years. So
yeah, crossing the Atlantic and then through the Caribbean Ocean and or sea, Caribbean Sea, and then through the Panama Canal, and then from there up to Hawaii, which is a detour of 10,000 miles or something like that when you're doing a circumnavigation.
Yeah, going to Hawaii from Panama is almost crossing the Atlantic twice. That's the distance.
Oh, really?
And we didn't know we were going until like a week before, because it was right when Panama was shutting down due to coronavirus. We were going to go to Galapagos, that shut down. We were going to go to French Polynesia, that shut down. So we just decided to turn right instead and went to Hawaii.
So you hadn't even planned to go from Panama Canal to Hawaii. You were just you were heading out, and then had to decide. You had enough supplies on board. I guess you had enough water and diesel to last you a bit. And
we did, yeah. So we loaded up on all of that because we were actually going to have. We had like 5 friends flying over from the UK, from Sweden, from Denmark, and they were going to join us to go to the Galapagos, and we were going to sail around the Galapagos. We had it all set up. They had flights. Some of them actually flew out. And then, so we had loaded up for that. And then all of a sudden we were changing destinations. We actually had a friend fly over from the other side of the country. And in the middle of his flight, we had to change the destination. So when he landed, he's like, oh, I know I told you we were going to French Polynesia, but we're not doing that anymore. So everybody has a story like that around that time. Things were just, anybody who was traveling, things were just changing by the minute. So you didn't really know what you were doing. Yeah.
Yeah, the effect that COVID's had on everybody's life is just yeah, unbelievable when you look back on it. I think 2020, 2021 is going to be looked back. Well, it's just some of the most bizarre years of our lifetime, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
The way it's kind of
Let's hope so. Let's hope it doesn't get more bizarre.
Well, yeah, touch wood. Touch wood. You can never say never right now. Going back to the ocean crossing, because I mean, obviously, I hadn't realized that the distance between Panama Canal and Hawaii was almost as long as crossing the Atlantic. So I was going to. Sorry,
it's twice. Almost twice. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to kind of ask you just what that first Atlantic crossing was, but it sounds as though that might not have even been your longest trip without landfall.
It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't the longest, but I would say it was the most. Yeah, it was the first. It was 6 months after we bought the boat. And talking to other people and looking back, usually people prepare for that for years. But we had sort of a, we had, what is the term? It's like we were just like, whatever, let's just do it. I mean, it can't be that hard. And so 6 months after, we bought the boat, we had some friends join, and we just set off. Half a day after setting off, our GPS died. So we weren't quite as prepared as we thought. But just like with everything on a boat, you just kind of work around it. And it was 18 days across. And, we had a big group at the time. There's 5 of us aboard in total. And so we were sharing these, and, it was relatively social because we have 5 people. So looking back, it was quite fun and quite easy. So.
And
I was going to ask you. Sorry, Mia.
I just want crossing the Atlantic Ocean is something many people have on their to-do list. They want to take off.
I've got it on my to-do list. I think I might have messaged you at some point saying, "Can I join you for a crossing?"
you can definitely join us for a crossing.
Yeah.
Probably not the Atlantic.
You might have to contact, you might have to contact us in a couple years if that's the case. If you're waiting for that one.
Yeah, no, I'm actually. Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily the Atlantic in particular, but I certainly have it on my list as well. I was a friend of mine is currently in the middle of the Atlantic right now, rowing rowing, one of those rowing boats where.
Yeah.
And I was actually going to speak to him just as he was delayed in Canary Islands because they had some issue with the rowing boat. Some part broke before they left. And I was actually going to speak to him on here before he left, but they're currently, what are they? Something like 25 days out of, they're halfway there now. And kind of imagining, obviously on a rowing boat is a different kettle of fish. I mean, I can feel the anguish in his face and feel the pain that they're going through. Like, obviously, on a sailboat is probably like a 5-star hotel compared to what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, like, what is it actually like? Like, so you've got obviously just 18 days of nothingness, no land. What did you have fair weather conditions? Was it a fairly straightforward crossing in that sense? I mean, you obviously probably avoided hurricane season and things like that.
The Atlantic crossing is actually one of the more easiest ones because you often do it from November to February, and that's when trade winds have kicked in, and you kind of have a very, very stable wind direction that is always from the same side. So you don't have to do much in terms of the sail setting. And you also have a current that is following you along. So there's actually someone who crossed the Atlantic in a barrel just by following the currents. So we often joke that crossing the Atlantic Ocean it doesn't require much skill. You just have to put up the sails and eventually you will get there.
And even if you don't, you'll still get there.
You just hit any point along kind of like between, I guess, Florida
There's a string of islands.
South America. You'll wash up on the shore. Did you guys head to the Caribbean? Was it straight from is that where you landed?
Yeah.
That's right. So we started in Las Palmas in the Canaries.
Yeah.
And then went to Guadeloupe in the Caribbean.
One thing I wanted to ask you was, like, I've obviously seen that you've had, I guess, friends or family that have hopped on and jumped on and off at some points in your trips. Have you had any I guess mostly your positive stories of any interesting crew members that just must be a different demographic? Suddenly you get someone who possibly hasn't sailed before, not used to the environment. Suddenly you're kind of engulfed and on board with them for a long.
We've never had like bad experiences, but I think as you alluded to, we've had people who had a view of sailing that wasn't consistent with what the reality is. And so we had someone who came and felt very isolated. We had a couple of guys who were pretty tough, or so they thought, until we were slamming upwind, and they were basically knocked out the entire day. And we get the same. So we're just aware of it. And but other than that, I mean, we've had about 50 people aboard in total, and it's generally quite positive experiences.
Scott is the skipper on the boat, and some people that are used to being leaders in their own life, or have a leadership personality, they can have a pretty tough time getting used to the fact that Scott, their friend, is the leader, is the one deciding everything related to the boat. So sometimes I don't think we have had major issues, but that could be an issue.
Some friction,
but I would say we've had great crew in general, and we can sail the boat ourselves, so we don't rely on people to sail the boat for us or help us out with that. So if they turn out to be incapable of sailing because of seasickness or
just
other things,
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's not.
Did I say 50 crew? I think we had 52.
I always bring up the story. We had one in the Mediterranean, and she couldn't sail for the life of her.
Yeah.
She didn't know anything about the sails. She was not interested in trimming the sails or getting into that, and she was extremely seasick as well. But on the other hand, every time we done a major sail and we would get in late at night and we would be tired and wet and all of that, she's always prepared food for us to have when we were safely secured. And actually, that was much more valuable to us. So you can be a good crew member in many different ways.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think, yeah, that's an impression that, having obviously been on boats, it's definitely that romantic kind of idyllic view that people have of what sailing is. They see people kind of in bikinis and like sat on the front of the boat that on tropical islands that looks amazing, when actually the real, sailing is a completely different kettle of fish, and, extremely like mentally challenging, physically challenging. Have you had any, like, I know you must have, but like any kind of hair raising, your scariest moments of like being on the boat? Like, you doesn't sound as though you've been in any like major like pirate areas either, but any like security or weather issues that come to mind? That
security, not so. We had a bit of an issue, or perceived security issue. But I'll start with the weather first. It was actually right at the beginning. So we were crossing the Med. It's the Gulf of Leon between Palermo and Menorca, which is right by Mallorca. And we got hit by a storm that wasn't forecasted, that actually ended up destroying a lot of the Cinque Terre coast. And so we were getting 45 knots, which is, I guess, times 1.8. So probably like 70 kilometers an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
Winds and waves that were halfway up the mast, so like 10-meter waves on the boat. And we were so green at the time. I mean that in the inexperienced way, but we actually were kind of sick too. So I guess in both ways, we just left it on autopilot and the boat took care of itself. So it taught us pretty early that the boat can really handle a lot more than we can. But it was, in retrospect, we probably pushed it a bit too hard considering the weather conditions. In those weather conditions, we probably should have set up the boat for, just set it up and not continue to sail.
So were you sailing at that time? Did you have both sails up and you were actually sailing, or did you have to?
Yeah, we were moving along at almost top speed. We just had autopilot and we were just sitting there staring at the boat sailing itself.
But we just had a small sliver of sail.
You don't put the whole sail up, but you put a small bit
out.
So
you put like multiple reefs in or whatever it is, and
a handkerchief out. That was all we had.
Okay.
But we were flying along at almost top speed for that boat, and but we just blindly trusted the boat, and it worked out. But
kind of like white knuckle riding, like just
that's right.
Hoping
it's like I don't know anything else. I don't know what else I can do, so I'm just gonna sit here and go along for the ride.
And our crewman at the time, he was just having a blast in the cockpit, sitting, riding the waves in the cockpit and smiling the whole time, also being so sick. But he just, he was a racer himself and he just enjoyed it so much.
Blindly thinking we had everything under control.
The skipper there is kind of like, everything's fine. Meanwhile, secretly thinking, I hope this boat just holds its.
I had my life jacket on, I was tethered in, everything.
But I think I was more scared on our last crossing when suddenly we had water inside the boat and it was salt water and it was coming in not at a decent rate. We're not sinking per se, but we couldn't figure out where the water was coming from, and it was salt water. And it was right there. We have our batteries, so all electricity would go out if that continued. And we were in the middle of the Pacific, or the ocean, the biggest ocean in the world, and it was just the two of us. And the
weather was pretty bad. And big waves, we were just slamming the entire time.
I think I was a little bit more scared there before we found out what it was.
What was it?
Ended up being just a little. So basically, for the chain for the anchor, when water goes in there on this boat, what happens is it takes it into a tank inside, The reason they do that is just to remove, most boats, the water just runs right out, but this one takes it to a tank inside and then pumps it out, or a storage area, a gray water tank, so to speak. And so when the water level gets to a certain point, there's a switch that turns on and pumps it out. So the little $5 switch failed and it didn't pump it out. And because we were going upwind, we were on one side of the boat and the secondary backup alarm was on the other side of the boat. So it never actually, the alarm never went off. The water just filled up to the point where it started running into the boat.
And then it just kept overflowing. So was that a case of you just like buckets? Like, were you able to do that?
Some buckets.
Yeah, started with buckets, started with sponges, thinking, maybe it's just a little bit coming out. And then, of course, it filled back up. But it's a switch, so then I just manually wired it. And so literally went down there and just held the two wires together, pumped it out every couple hours. And then took the switch apart, which I'd never done before, and tried to fix it. So, which I didn't succeed at the time. But that's just sort of an example. In the middle of the ocean, you have something break and you have no idea how it works, but you just have to figure it out.
Yeah, I watched a recent video. I don't know how recent it was, but it might have been one that you put up fairly recently of some, I guess, an example of that where and this is a memory that I have very, very clear from growing up with my dad, who's always had a boat, like constantly requiring to fix things like every single day. And I think I saw something where your engine packed up, like, I don't know where maybe you were in the Caribbean somewhere, and it didn't sound as though you had too much kind of mechanical knowledge of your engine at the time, certainly. And your engine stopped working.
Yeah, it just died. We were just going, and we had just gotten out of a reef pass because there was a huge reef right around this island. So we just got out with a lot of current, and then all of a sudden, just boom! It's like somebody turns off the key, and it just wouldn't turn back on. And so, you have the reference material that you have aboard. You have very basic email. You can email people and ask them, but trying to diagnose something like that remotely is pretty challenging. So. I just sat there and just poked at things for 2 days, basically, until I found something that sort of worked. And so we got it up again.
Yeah, so you got it working, and that kind of like, it sounds like you had internet connections at some times, but like what's that just disconnection and nomadic, like that freedom that nomadic lifestyle must give you? Is that something that you kind of can appreciate when you're out there, or do you only really appreciate it now that you're kind of stuck back in the middle of rural Denmark, that you kind of...
Personally, I really enjoy it. And I'm not, like, we have a satellite, so you could check emails every day, and you can do like basic social media if you want to.
You can read text-based news, which, as an aside, we were not able to do because we didn't know how to do it, going from Panama to Hawaii when this was March 2020. So you can imagine all the news going on. So we couldn't check it. And actually, we were pretty happy about that. For me, it's sort of like, I've never been addicted to a drug, but I imagine it's like that because when we're on land, we have good internet. You're on social media, you're reading the news every day, which doesn't really add much to your life. And then when we go offshore, the first day you're just like itching. You grab your phone, you're like, oh crap, there's nothing. I'm reading these old articles again.
You keep refreshing.
You keep refreshing, and it's just the same thing again and again. And I would imagine that's what it's like as a drug addict. And then by day 2, maybe day 3 or 4, you actually get into that. It's sort of like a meditation. There's only one thing to focus on, and that's your surroundings. And it's very freeing. And as we get close to land, it's a mixture of being happy that we're about to go to a new place, we're about to check in. And I remember when we got to Hawaii, when we got internet again, Mie didn't want to check the news. She was just like, I don't want to. I'm very happy. I'm not stressed out about what's going on in the world. I can't do anything about it anyway. And so I think it was like a couple days before she was like, okay, maybe I should just see what's going on in the world.
And I get anxious. I don't know. It's like I get a little bit stressed when after a crossing, I have to check emails again and like go on social media again and know that I will be back into that life. So I kind of delay it as long as I can.
Yeah, that must be an amazing place, like amazing place to be. I guess the closest thing I've ever had to that was when, you know, I go offline, like just go offline for an adventure but the last, you know, it's getting harder and harder to do on land. Certainly, obviously, there's the great wildernesses and stuff, but even nowadays, you know, that you've got, if you take a phone, you've got connection. It's almost seeking out places to overtly avoid that is the challenge these days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I suppose a slightly more, probably not an easy or maybe not even a fair question, but because you've probably seen some of the most, well, in my mind, because I love like the tropics and I love like, you know, islands, diving, sea, like, you know, sea, ocean. So probably not the fairest question, but are there any real kind of standout places that, you know, we've already said, you know, you've probably got categories because, you know, you can't really compare like the Med with the Caribbean, for example, but just because of the just completely different, you know, culture and things like that. But are there any places that you would say like, wow, like gonna go back or just loved it because of whatever? Like, do you have any of those kind of places? I mean, I've seen pictures of French Polynesia, and I'm not going to lie, that looks that looks incredible. But are there any places?
Yeah, you know, it's we've been to around 29 countries on the boat, and I think you know, the more we see places, the more we sort of segment them. So as you alluded to, the Med is great for the harbors. The Med is great for the culture. Maui, surprisingly, we love quite a bit. We could see ourselves living there for a period of time because we both kite surf. So the
Hawaii.
Yeah, on Hawaii. So it's an island in Hawaii, state of Hawaii, and it's, the people are really great. You know, everybody who's living there sort of stepped away from normal life and decided to devote their lives to wind sport or some sort of outdoor activity. It's a really nice community there. French Polynesia actually exceeds all the expectations that we had about it. The anchorages are, yeah, out of a fairy tale, basically. The diving in Bonaire is amazing. What other places? The people in Colombia are absolutely amazing. Nicest people you've met anywhere. But yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I could do it again. I could go back and.
Yeah, I kind of figured.
Yeah. So we often get the question, what is your favorite place? And we don't have that. You have favorite places for different things, and that's how it works out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my answer is the same. I couldn't agree more with you on that. Like that question, as much as I asked it, I knew it was slightly unfair, but yeah. I just figured that you'd probably have some highlights, which you've kind of you've already mentioned. Talking about like the people, like the yachting lifestyle, like the kind of like the culture, the subculture of actually being a yachty, being a like nomadic sailor, boat owner. You must come across, you know, loads of other people who are, you know, in the same boat, not to use the pun, but like, you know, who are doing similar things or living the same lifestyle. Are they like, what's that like, meeting those people in various, I guess, yacht clubs, small sailing clubs when you arrive in anchorages in remote places? What's that experience like?
It's great. We met amazing people, and I think that's also a big part of the trip. That is to meet other people sailing as well.
Yeah.
There are more young people coming or doing this more and more, kind of our age, meaning below 45, I guess.
But historically, it's been when people retire, right? So
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So so the span of age that we hang out with is quite big, actually, because in an anchorage you will find all the different ages, and sometimes we do say like, oh, should we go and hang out with the old people? Because we do meet more of those than young people. But obviously the friends that we have made has mainly been around our age, and they are really inspirational. They make this lifestyle work in so many different ways. Obviously, it requires some money, some capital to be able to do this, and people at our age, like, and people acquire those money in many different ways, and that's really inspirational to see.
And yeah, I mean, everybody makes a sacrifice to do it. I guess in some way you could equate it to backpacking in Southeast Asia, where you have this sort of banana pancake trail. So the route that most cruisers take, they call it the milk run across the Atlantic, and then the coconut milk run through the Pacific. You see the boats again and again. I mean, there's a German boat that we're friends with. We first met them in the Caribbean. We saw them again in Panama, and then we saw them again in French Polynesia. So it's a nice community, even though you have different countries that you come from, different age ranges and everything. You're connected by the fact that you're adventuring and you're cruising. Downside is it's easy to get stuck in that bubble. So it's easy to go to a place, just again, like backpacking Southeast Asia. You go to the places where you meet people that are just like you. And what I think what you're doing with your company, what we try to do, not with our company, but just when we travel, is try to break out of that comfort zone and try to interact and immerse ourselves more with the local community. And it's not always easy, especially when the process itself can be challenging, but it's just so easy to go back to people who think like you, talk like you, are doing the same thing as you. So it's sort of there's two sides to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that you're, like you were saying, similar to the backpacking trail, was that you bump into the same, if you keep going to the same like style of places, you'll meet the same people, but then you've got the freedom the choice then to actually say, you know what, we're going to go our own way. And then you might not see that same boat for another, I don't know, a couple of months, I guess, and then perhaps bump into them in a port further south or north or wherever you're heading. A question that I've kind of been curious to ask, but I having thought about it a little bit, I guess it's probably you haven't had the chance to see like a big effect. But we obviously in the mainstream media, there's obviously a lot of focus on things like plastic waste and stuff these days. I mean, one of my memories, only because it was quite recent, but sailing in the Med, was the amount of actually rubbish that there was in general. I guess 3 years is certainly not a time enough to give a spectrum of like, was it bad 3 years ago versus, let's say 50, 60 years ago. But is there like, I mean, did you go through any major places where you thought, wow, this is horrifically polluted, or the level of like, pollutions in the ocean were in where you were? Was there any places that you thought were like,
I mean, I think the way that we can do the comparison is just look at different, because as you said, 3 years is not that long in that scale. But, we started in the Med, and even on that maiden voyage, in the middle of the Med, you see plastic bags floating around. You see, of course, fishing nets, things like that. And then what Mia has us do on a lot of anchorages is we go and try to pick up plastic. And in Croatia, that was... we ran out of bags to collect all the trash. You dive down and you can grab 5 or 6 water bottles just on one little, just snorkel it down. And the bottom is just covered with these single-use plastic bottles. And then after that, Mia made the rule that nobody can bring a plastic bottle aboard, because we're thinking that, people who buy those probably think that they're going to recycle it and everything is fine. But we found them at the bottom, right underneath the boat at our anchorage. And then we go to the Caribbean, and the Eastern Caribbean, the issue there is, there's a lot of coral. The majority of it is dead. And my understanding, there's been a decent amount of coral bleaching. There's been overexploitation from a tourism perspective. Overfishing, the fishing methods that they use. And then when we go to French Polynesia, which is just a bit more difficult to get to, a bit more protected in some of the isolated areas, it's, as I would imagine, that's how the Caribbean was 20 years ago. The coral reefs are just super healthy.
But we even hear from sailors there that when they were there 5 or 10 years ago, there was like 30% more coral, and the coral has been dying just in that time span. It's so devastating to see. And you go to like so remote places in the South Pacific, like there are no people living there, and there are plastic on the leeward side of the islands, just washing ashore. And you can collect as much as you want, and it feels like you will never get rid of it. It's really devastating to see.
It's one of the, I mean, you probably, it's, I guess, a little bit topical now because of that recent documentary release of Seaspiracy. I don't know if have you watched that?
Yeah, we saw it.
Yeah, obviously, like, really graphic depiction of what we're kind of doing to our oceans, mainly through the fishing, and they kind of brushed over the plastic issue, but like the plastic issue in the ocean is like, sometimes you can like you can sound like an eco warrior when you talk about it and go on a bit, but it is so bad. I mean, you know, even where I live, where my mother lives in Kenya, like in the north coast of Kenya, where there's a large section of beach there, wide open beaches, you know, so, you know, beach and then sand dunes behind, and kilometers of it, and, you know, places where there's not really anybody there. You know, there's towns and villages and stuff, but the level of the microplastic, and we keep talking about microplastic, but, you know, tiny bits of plastic that are just everywhere, ingrained in the sand, that is, people just don't really realize that. And it is really it's a really sad state of affairs when you think about it, isn't it?
And our last sail from Hawaii to French Polynesia, it's in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the ocean, and we don't see any other boats, and that's very normal because you can only see 10 miles, so it's very normal that you don't see boats. But we kind of always see Chinese fishing boats that do the deep sea fishing.
Yeah,
and they're just picking up everything they get to. And a lot of them are not even, you have to register the boat so you can see them on a system, and
it's like a beacon basically, but they turn it off.
So I think it's very obvious that they are not all doing it legally. And, I think they estimate that 90% of our fish have been gone from the oceans, and just devastating.
I mean, literally on that sail, you know, it was a 3,000 nautical mile sail, and for the vast majority of it, we saw nothing on radar, nothing on AIS, which is the beacon system. And with those two, we can probably see about 40 miles out. And then we get to a certain area which is known for productive fishing because of the currents or whatever. And it was just constantly, you see you know, there's helicopters, there's massive fishing fleets, and they're dragging miles and miles of line. We caught a net with the boat just while along in the middle of the Pacific. So, you know, even when we go out to these remote areas, people have found a way to go there and destroy the environment.
So they weren't even on your radar or whatever, because they've turned off these. So
they show up on radar because the radar
not
just
radar, but like on the
beacon. It's called the AIS. They turn it off, and so I think they mentioned it in Seaspiracy, and I understand now because in French Polynesia they're even talking about it because there's an exclusive economic zone around much of these countries, and it protects the fishery. And so by turning it off, the theory is that they wouldn't be detected, and then they would basically go into other countries' fisheries. I think it was the Galapagos where there's tons of Chinese fishing boats that just cross into the Ecuadorian economic zone and then illegally fish. And that's happening in French Polynesia too. And so they turn it off so that you can't see them. And so
and I mean, I can obviously, like most people, come away from watching something like that, then hearing it firsthand from people like yourselves who've actually seen this, like, evidence firsthand.
Well, we saw that before we knew about it. We were just like, what is going on? Why did
we've had a really big problem with this in East Africa since I can remember. I mean, you know, growing up there, like I lived in Tanzania for a bit, and back then it was. There was just no regulation, and it was of fishing and control because it was all corrupt. And there was the use of like dynamite fishing initially. So that destroyed the reefs and basically decimated all the reef fish because you chuck a dynamite under wipes out everything. They scoop up what they want. And then more recently, like, you know, we've had it for ages, is these deals that have been given to, and I need to fact check me on this, but like Chinese commercial fishermen and Thai commercial fishermen, that they've been given contracts to, you know, to fish their waters in Kenya and in Tanzania and stuff. And it's obviously decimated the local fishing population, who are the subsistence fishermen, the people that have been going out in their dugout canoes and their dhows for hundreds and hundreds of years. Yeah. And, you know, you come away from watching that with a really kind of depressing sense, don't you? Because you know the answer, but you can't really see the way of getting there. So it's not really a nice position to be in, is it? And
sometimes,
I guess
unfortunately we use it to go snorkeling. We're like, or diving. If we're, I don't know if I'm really up for diving today, we're like, well, it's probably gone in 20 years, so we should do it now. And it's very sad, but that's kind of how we see it, because I cannot see how it can be sustained.
Yeah. On that note, very positive message. No, but I think, yeah, everybody can play their part, I guess. I mean, I know, you know, everybody can play their part. Like you said, you're doing your small bit, no plastics. And I think it's just been more aware, you know, that's what I say, is just been like, just thinking about every plate that you have and things. But it's easy to say living in, you know, places like this, but
there are like as well, there are companies that are trying to get rid of the plastic in the oceans, and I think they're actually doing a good job. So we just have to make sure that not that much plastic ends up in the ocean in the first place. Then I think we could actually.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's definitely some great people, great, like, super smart minds that are, and money that's going into this, which is obviously the most important, you know, follow the money. And if they can be a way that people can make money from this, then that will be the way that it'll be solved, with everybody playing their little part. So hopefully that happens. What about, like, next for you guys? What's you're currently in Denmark, you're currently in now an extended lockdown. Your boat's in French Polynesia, which we've alluded to. When do you plan on going back, and what's the next step of your journey?
We're a bit on the receiving end of rules right now. So, you know, the situation as of today is that obviously I can go back to the US. I can only stay here for another, I guess, 3 weeks or so before my visa runs out here. And I was able to come in because of Denmark has a sweetheart exemption. So I was able to come in with Mia at the time. And so I'm going to go to the US and hopefully get the vaccine. And then hopefully at some point, not too long from now, either Mia can fly to the US and join me, and then we both fly to French Polynesia, or she just flies from Europe directly to French Polynesia. But nobody knows when they're going to open. There's an exemption process, but it's not crystal clear. Some people get approved, some people don't get approved. So the answer is wherever we're allowed to be.
Okay, so the short term is relying on some sort of hope, and the world gets their act together on this COVID scenario. The longer term, what's your plan for the boat, for next steps? Do you have, like, how far ahead have you looked? Are you going to stay around, like, the islands of the Pacific, or are you going to head kind of more towards? Because as far as I'm aware, you're still kind of not necessarily on a plan to necessarily circumnavigate. You're going to enjoy the journey, but you're going to carry on going that way around the Pacific. So head towards either Australia, New Zealand, maybe like the other islands.
Yeah, I think that's the plan. I mean, it's you know, on a boat. What was the quote that you said? It's the plans are written in
the sand at low tide.
Yeah. So
I like.
We have no idea. You know, we were going to go to Hawaii actually before we flew here. We were going to sail to Hawaii And then as we were preparing the boat to go to Hawaii, I looked at the insurance documents, and they just changed one line. And actually, it was a 14-page document. They changed one line, which made it so that I couldn't stay in Hawaii more than 3 months. And then at the last second, we were like, oh crap, we can't do that. So then we had to leave the boat in French Polynesia, change the plane tickets completely, and then fly to Europe like 3 days later. So it's pretty hard to predict. But what would we like to do? I guess we want to spend more time in French Polynesia, see a lot of the South Pacific, and maybe even a bit of the North Pacific. New Zealand, if they ever open up again. And then probably spend a lot of time in Asia. So that's the plan. Maybe since now we've realized that our original pace was just untenable, and since we've allocated more time to the trip, maybe even leave the boat for periods and explore over land, maybe buy a Tuk Tuk.
Good plan.
And yeah, try to immerse ourselves more. We keep saying we're going to do it, but we really want to put a focus on immersing ourselves more in the places that we're going, and not just as we joke, sort of the cruiser bars right on the waterfront, right in front of where all the boats are anchored. We want to get beyond that. And every time we've gone beyond that, it's always been a much richer experience. We've always appreciated the place a lot more than just going, oh yeah, I remember the tourist bar at that place. It's always better behind the tourist bar.
Yeah. Okay.
But definitely spend a lot of time in Southeast Asia as well. We kind of think between 2 and 3 years there, but that part is very open-ended as well. Maybe we also want to go to the Philippines, and have also talked about kicking ass in the challenge you have there.
The Philippines. Yeah, you would love it. Obviously, being sailors, you'd probably get itchy because there's like a crew. There's a Filipino crew, and that's a huge part of the experience. Is like meeting the amazing crew, and these guys in the Philippines. They're born on water pretty much. So a lot of them are just like they have sailing in their blood, and a lot of that trip is really just the experience of meeting the crew, learning from them. And obviously being on the water, you're on the water like shorter periods of time, but it's short, kind of fast if there's wind. But it'd be great to have you on that. You would absolutely love it. It's a trip that we've always struggled with to really get full interest, because there's a bit of a barrier with sailing, and this is kind of our impression. And also, you'll appreciate this, but boats aren't cheap, and even though these, it's the Philippines, and people think that the Philippines is cheap and things, those boats are, they're not very cheap to buy, even though they're small, locally made trimarans. They're also used as an income stream for the Filipino crews, the owners throughout the year when there's tourists, and they make really good money. So for us to convince them to say, hey, we want to sail these for 5-6 days, but actually we can only really afford to pay, to make it affordable. They're also making a commitment. So that's always been a challenge, but it's an amazing place, and people, amazing too. So. Anyway, hopefully we'll see you out in the Philippines at some point then, or if we can squeeze a place on the boat. That was my intention all along. You're
definitely welcome on the boat whenever people are allowed to fly again.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, guys, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Probably gone over a little bit of time. Thanks for giving us your time. Really nice to catch up with you again and speak about your epic adventures. Hopefully we'll maybe do another version of this in I don't know, in a couple of years, and catch up with your journey and see what's happened since. So
maybe
thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.